Hello, everybody. Welcome to retrospective session for the Open dApp framework proposal. And this is the final session, which we are going to run related to a closing report, which was funded in Fund 9. And we first going to share a bit of insights from the closing report. We have a draft ready. And once we're done with that, we can collectively share some experiences and learnings that we had related to these events and related to the material that were about, which were about these things we were doing. And yeah, once we have had some discussions, we will also answer what could be the next steps. I will have some ideas, but I would be interested what would you also prefer to focus on. And we end up with a session feedback, which is a quick one because we have a Google form that we can asynchronously fill out. So quick introduction. So we created the proposal because there was no general framework for a decentralized project management, decentralized applications. And we thought that let's do some analysis around these applications. And we mainly looked at T-Work platform, where people can put bounties, create tasks, and like recognize their contributions there. And through these sessions we have having, the idea was that we gather the community the ways of how they manage projects, and we create like a small snapshot of that, and then find out what differentiates them and if we can build that framework, and that would be useful for all the people for all these participants to kind of be helpful, basically. And in each of these sessions, we also did some analysis, and now at the end, we also are collating it into background knowledge for the educational material. I pulled one picture from the main project management board from one of the frameworks we designed. If you want to get more details, this is a bit more foggy, I guess. There on the right corner, you will see this Marabot link to that one. But basically, this framework is split into three different parts, where it starts with task management and documentation. So where are these things? When you describe somebody, how do you manage projects, what assets they can look at, and also location for communication so that they have clear understanding. Is it in Zoom? Is it in chat? Where are these? And then another part is coordination management. How do you share this information with each other, and how do you prepare for workshops? How do you coordinate, and how do you improve? How do you iterate, basically? How do you create this feedback loop? And final part was the task management. How do you start the process of a task? How do you update it? How do you verify or validate it? And how do you archive it? These were the main steps for task management. And then we take this framework and did some sessions around that. So in the Marabot, I dropped in this closing report, and we already listed quite many, several things, what we learned, and what from the team side, what was valuable. And from each this session, we also included in the feedback from the participants themselves. And this framework was used in several networks. For example, I used it in early days in SingularityNet. And actually, I'm still, when you need to bootstrap a new task management process, this is actually pretty helpful guidance for me. And in addition, we've been using that in some kind of bootstrapping meetings. So when we have different leaders from different ecosystems thinking, okay, how do we start an ecosystem? Then there are, for example, the last session we had with Curtis Myers, we were talking about how the tools shape the culture, and there was also this experience of how through their time the like project management changed over time, and from that you kind of derived some interesting insights. I'm not going to go in very detail here, but everything is like written out in closeout reports, and you will also find some links to the actual learning material. Yeah, so introductory research, that was mainly the session where we shared that framework itself and tried to do some like ideation of what tasks you are doing, then doing like how do you coordinate, and that was like the starting point. Then we used these discussions and feedback to somewhat shape the next session. So every time we used the feedback form to kind of know what's going to be the next session. So the next session was project management tools and introduction to task management. Then from there, once we had a bit more clarity on the tools, we were thinking, okay, what kind of products and platforms there are, what's the difference, and how it changes the culture. And yeah, and now we are finally in this session where we're trying to bring all that together and kind of show it all at once. And in the end, you will see quite a lot of these links. And on the Mara board, final thing is also this Open dApp framework learning materials. It starts with an overview, like a bit of, like also includes all the videos, which we had, all the material. And each of these sessions we also had the summary session. So if you don't have like the full hour to watch, there is like everything aggregated, all the lessons into one smaller, like 10 to 15 minutes. And that's quite a long 40-page right now. And also this information, what we're doing here, how we're running this workshop, will be included in the session. And yeah, final piece of the item is the Mara board itself, where we have everything in one place. So all the sessions we had, all the meeting notes, all the analysis of the sessions, and a bit of how do we manage the projects, how we prepare next sessions if people are interested, how we were running things. And yeah, templates that we were using. There was a huge change where we were using the canvas to kind of create this module, or like this PBL material. And right now we opted into the Google Doc, but even if after this the closing report, at some point we are going to move to the Andamia platform, because that's the place where we want to end up, and that makes this feedback loop perfect. And so yeah, this is intro to all of the content we are dropping in. And yeah, is there any questions you have raised up? And if already like what I shared and who were in the previous calls, I can see most of you were, and what kind of experiences you had and what learnings you had from these calls. For example, Peter, are you here? You were in the first call where I shared this task management process, and I also brought that process into defining the translation, now called translation workgroup. And what were your experiences or learnings while we went through this? Because you were also part of actually when we tried to pilot that kind of method.
True. It's well, it did bring order in a lot of chaos. Well, basically, it was all very ad hoc. Before we went over the whole process and well, actually made a process. So that in itself was the biggest win for me. But yeah, to be completely honest, at the same time, we didn't do like a A/B test on the same situation with another procedure, trying to figure out the process. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, to establish what the different, and hey everyone, this is Newman. To establish sort of, you know, a baseline of like what community development would be like without this structure, which I think I think, you know, just as somebody, I don't think I was around for how it was used, but I do like this systematic approach, such that you can say, like, you can coordinate the efforts of a community and say, okay, this is how we are going to do our task management and documentation and communication. You know, if any structure in that way, I think can help, at least for folks like me.
Yeah, I think looking at the other initiatives where we also try to improve the processes, I think translation where we applied this is still the most organized one in my mind. And yeah, might be a bit personal or subjective rather, but
regarding the experience, if you still remember, because yeah, if you look at the date, it was like last year when this was framework was created, and I guess we started using it also like a year ago. But do you remember, like, was it like complicated to spin it off, or was it like took too long, or it felt like a process that was quite well, I don't know, developed, if you do remember?
honestly, I don't really remember it feeling like it took too long. I mean, I do remember some of the members joining in on seeing what was happening and feeling a bit out of place almost, like how to say, I don't know, they just wanted to translate, let's say. They didn't want to have the process figured out. They kind of assumed it already was figured out before joining. So having that step back, and in my mind it was super thorough and leaving pretty much nothing to uncertainty, and yeah, that's perfect. Then I would almost say, even if it takes a bit longer than most would feel like it takes or should take, yeah, that's not really an issue because the result is there.
We have few people from Ambassador program here, Tommy, Vanessa, Stefan, Felix, and I recently noticed Newman also there. But have you kind of noticed differences from how translation workgroup is operating compared to the rest of workgroups?
I would say, second a little bit what Pete mentioned, it's the one which seems the less messiest, because it's really about processes. It's not about, I would say, less about ego, individuals and their titles or roles, but really about streamlined processes. And I think this is just much clearer on this rigor.
That makes me wonder how much of that is because of the setup of the workgroup, because it's really straightforward in a way. It's just, there's a blog post, it needs translations. Like the people that are translating different languages, they don't really need to interact with each other. Like the Spanish or the Russian translation, it's a separate thing, which allows it for really nicely getting mapped out and yeah, structured.
Mm-hmm. Like mentioned, across the streamlines, like I mentioned, for example, that it's very clear what needs to be done. And I think this clarity is simply not yet there at other groups and guilds. There's a lot of open ground to say, maybe also this and that. And I think actually this as well, the translators have been the group who have been quite active since a while already. What doesn't match to the other groups? So I think it's a good point here.
Yeah. From my experience, we did actually have quite like several hard points, like the validation part and like measuring that and not getting like a clear process. But yes, on one sense, it is easier because it doesn't require constant coordination, where some projects would require that. But for example, to me, writers, video worker could actually establish quite streamlined processes too. And where you have like the asset at the end or expectation at the end.
I sort of think for me, I mean, I wasn't there when you shared it in this group, but I think there's kind of a bit of surprise from people sometimes when they're asked to think about the process. Quite often people come in and they expect, I think PCU's kind of said this, that people expect the process to be there and they come in and they just do it. Whereas to be asked, well, how do you want to run this, is kind of characteristic of a decentralized program. And it's an adjustment for people to think, oh, I'm being asked how I want to do my work and how it should fit in. And I think that's quite cool. But I also think maybe this kind of process isn't necessarily what we would aim for in every group, maybe in some, but it's not necessarily what every work group would be trying to come to. And I'd kind of move this on to one of the things that came out quite strongly in the latter sessions of this project, is very much that there isn't one size fits all, and the tools we use and the structures that we use really shape our culture. It's not always the other way around. It's not always that you have a culture in a group and they find tools to fit it. Sometimes it's more like there's certain tools available and that kind of shoehorns you into a certain way of working. That's a really strong insight that we got from the other sessions, and I'm just wondering what people think about it.
Sometimes I speak in quotes and stuff like that, but yeah, I think the quote that fits is I make my tool and then my tool makes me. This relationship between the tools we use and the culture that is created, and where that chicken and egg cycle sort of begins. And that's, I think, is really good insight. Likewise with that culture of sort of deciding how to work, as opposed to it being already decided, or the where in the maturation or the development of a community, a decentralized community or any community, where like things are established and I just come in and do my translation work, or I just come in and do the work, as opposed to, you know, establishing the container for how the work will be made.
And maybe also that sense that even if it is established when you come in, it could change and you could be part of making that decision. I think sometimes when people come in, they kind of think, oh my God, that's it, it's fixed and I can't have any input. And what we're kind of looking at here is, where do people have input and how?
Yeah, yeah. Not to go too far off the rails, but this came up in some point where yeah, what I'm hearing you say is the fixed, like what is fixed and what can change, and then when and how those processes happen. I guess this is governance, but one of the things that struck me was is the sort of seasonal, like, oh, there is a season when things become unfixed. There's a flood and then we change everything around, we iterate. But are we iterating constantly? Is it always a slow boil in the background, or is there a season for just like, you know, staying in a fixed zone? And one of my communities was like, we really want to introduce that sort of idea of the cyclical or the seasonal nature. It's just like, oh, we have a document and we have a member list and we have communication tools and we use all this, but periodically we review them and make changes based on feedback, you know, reflection and feedback.
So should have a cyclical review on the framework itself, so how the processes work, and so just going through over basically how do we do the things we are doing, and if we can improve.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a part of culture, right? It's just like, oh yeah, you know, I know that the things that appear fixed can be changed. I think that's what Vanessa, that's what I took from that little bit. It's certainly one of the things that I want from my systems and structures and institutions, is that, you know, they are solid or trustworthy, but then that they have the ability to change, and they're not in constant flux, but that they freely give themselves over to metamorphosis, transformation. You know, otherwise it just becomes rigid, and, you know, all kinds of bad things can happen. Yeah. Stephen writes in the chat, a culture that accepts and welcomes change. You know, yeah, and that's a great thing to add into the structural documents or the frameworks that we use, or the tools that we use. For instance, a very clear thing is just like when you have to repay the subscription to Zoom or other tools, and just like, okay, we decide to use Zoom for another year and make the payment, or are we going to do something else? You know, what options are there? You know, and maybe that's the time for periodic review.
I think this is a prime time to actually perhaps look at into in the way we have been doing these sessions, because it's also kind of like a one cycle now has finished, where we run these sessions. They were always in Zoom. We always planned ahead, like people we want to invite, like one-to-one, and then created a public invite. And we have resources, is everything in my report, and yeah, coordination progress usually, at least from my side, it was Discord, although it was a team effort where other team members use Telegram and Twitter that I don't look at all. Was that a good process? Had these people are here, well, maybe I guess for you it was okay to kind of capture that and find this place and find these sessions. The timings were always picked based on the aggregated results of when the participants wanted to meet. So I went to meet every time, but this was only sent to people in one-to-one private messages who were like, your insight would be valuable for this call, and I would like to join, what time it would be fit for you, and then based on that, the public event was created. Could anybody have like a small sharing of experience of finding these sessions and the way it was shared? Or right now that you learned that, whoa, that was a one-to-one message, I didn't get that. Is that a bad thing? Should it always be like public first, that I ask from public that what time you want to meet, instead of trying to find these specific people and make a plan with them?
Yeah, I don't really have a strong opinion, but I think the approach you took is makes a lot of sense. Then at least you've got some people in there which you know will be valuable to the topic.
Is the way I shared it a little bit spammy, or is it okay? Because another thing, like from my side, what I do is I basically announce the meeting like 2 or 3 weeks advance, and just, I think the last time I didn't even ping when the meeting started, but this time I was like, I have time, I'm just gonna ping everybody. And I don't ping like everybody. I mean, I just make a comment, so those who have Discord and has this on all, nothing is unmuted, only they will see the message. Like, is this approach fine for these meetings, or what do you, like, yeah, in general, what do you feel like? Was it easy to find this place, and could it be more clear? And including the invites, that was actually a template. If you browse through the content, you will find that we actually had very specific standard. How do we invite people, and what do we write in words?
I think it can be a bit of a bind sometimes, Tiva, because there's a feeling that if you're doing a project, you do need to get it out there if you want some attendance. So you kind of have to spam it a little bit. It feels like in this ecosystem you need to put it around a lot, so people are aware of it, and then give a lot of notice for something. But I suppose the other side of that is trying to get people interested in the event itself, you know, so that they have a reason to go, not just because they're aware of it, because they've seen it around a lot, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're making a focus on this, because it is it's a common thing. All communities need to deal with this idea of getting awareness to the sort of organizing team, and then wider audiences.
Okay, so actually there isn't that. Okay, so we had this public Excel where we shared who are these channels where we are sharing. So when you look at this, how do we manage projects? Yeah, stuff that we actually never showed in any of these sessions, but like how do we run the project? How do we send the milestone reports? What actions it took to kind of complete the closing report? All that stuff is like unshared. And so here we have this public proposal where we have all of these Google Forms, everything. And here we put these like documents. How do we send the private message? So that's the template. How do we invite the, like what goes, how, yeah, basically what to write into, how do we write the person, an example. And a bit more scattered around, but in the Google form or like in the Google Doc, it's much more clearly, but there is like each of these invitation messages. So people have an example of how it wrote. It slightly changes time to time. So if somebody's like, oh, how do I write it? Then you can copy paste this, put it in the ChatGPT and say, hey, write me similar, what by topic is this? It does great work. I actually put the template in ChatGPT and then I write real lines of code to tell me, okay, this is a new event, this is what I want to say. And it kind of creates this. Yeah. Everything is open source. So entire of this project idea was to like, how do we run these workshops? And so everybody who is doing research will take this and look at how we are running it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Vanessa mentions, I feel like when we started this project, the Catalyst community felt bigger, maybe less feel like spammy then. And also it was like this time when Catalyst stopped, so we got funding and we're like, oh, now people are going to propose new proposals and they will need help to kind of manage and create their milestone, like, because in proposal, and it's quite cool that if you write like quite detailed, or not, maybe not too detailed, but you know how to segue your milestones, what you need to complete there, and what could be the estimated costs. And this kind of research actually helps to derive that, because if you are thinking like, okay, what are we gonna do, where are we gonna have it, then you're gonna, if you list this out, you're gonna learn what kind of assets you will need. But yeah, then it's just kind of slowed down, and it was much harder, I guess, from my perspective, to gather the audience to think about, okay, how do you actually do the decentralized project management, especially in this environment where we kind of are trying to collaborate across teams.
Yeah, I think the irony was that, I mean, when we got funded for it, it was still, you know, Project Catalyst was still very much going full steam, and then all of a sudden there was a pause on everything, which lasted a good 5 or 6 months, 5 months maybe, where everything, and that had an impact on the community. Some people left, some people dispersed, focuses moved on to other things. So I think you have a point, Curtis, about the first workshops were very reflective of the culture as business as usual culture in late 2022, where people were expecting things to carry on, but then all of a sudden, the rug was pulled under the people's feet, as it were. Yeah, so it became a lot more. Now there's a much more, well, there's a very different kind of community, whether it's gone, whether it's dispersed, whether it's fragmented, or whether it's in new areas. That has radically changed.
We have had a few more people joining, Curtis and Randall. And you were in the session 3, basically the last session, where we talked about products, platforms, and culture. From that session till now, I think this is like few months, have you learned something from that, or what experiences you have continued to use from that point on, if any?
For my experience, most of the information and insight that I got from that meeting is used in my critical thought. It's less actively used in my processes. Right. So like the artifacts from that meeting, I'm not using directly. It's more just applying to critical thought.
So we do these PBL models that right now are in the document. I think that's on the third session. And we also have a recap video for that. And our agenda items were strategies for choosing platforms and products, how do communities collaborate, and what products and platforms have shaped your processes. So this is the one, some joined later. So when I mentioned at the beginning, like, oh, I used some information like in these new calls, like when you talk with like new teams and you're trying to propose like your services to them, especially if you're like a community builder or an ecosystem builder, then it's like quite a vague start. And this discussion and like that session actually helped to kind of surface a lot of these basic principles and mentioned like assessing team capacity, assessing team skills, assessing familiarity of tools and methods. And those were all good like starting points, like what questions to ask when you join a new call with a new person and you're trying to clarify, okay, what they want to do, what capacity they have, what resources they have, and like assessing project plan, trying to minimize my management overhead. Like once you go over these items, you have pretty good plan to actually create like a collaboration plan between this your and the planned entity. So for me, I actually was able to use the assets, and yeah, we all other stuff we looked into.
But that's actually an interesting point, because coming to what Curtis said, you say, for example, through the whole process implementation, I would say the biggest thing which has been achieved is that you yourself have built up a really strong knowledge on the whole thing. You know in which context it works. And this whole knowledge and experience mostly lives in yourself as an individual. The problem now is when you say, for example, for Curtis, that he didn't use the artifacts that much, but that it definitely helped us more an educational part. Would assume then that the next challenge is actually how do you extract your own knowledge by defining this framework to make it more accessible to others? Because right now I would say it's very frictionized as well. There's a lot of video recordings and Miro and documents. So it might be just a hell of a struggle for anybody to actually access the knowledge which you have generated through the proposal implementation.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a kind of perennial issue, Felix, is the sort of level of detail. I think Randall, can you might mute yourself?
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Is, you know, you have a richness in the level of detail, but you need an overview for a lot of people to get accessibility to that. But then on the other hand, also, and I think this is the lesson I'm sort of learning a little bit, is also there is a cost to building up skill, you know. So, I mean, the service that TiVo's workshops are providing require a lot of overhead, but that a good investment, I suppose, you know. So people go into those workshops, there's a kind of didactic vocational aspect to it, which you need to go through, you know. So in terms of future proposals and future funding, I think that cost needs to be recognized if you're going to build up your skill set in your community.
There was, I think it was Felix mentioning like the possibility of the external value of this work. And what I've experienced is that usually the creation of artifacts, like the process of doing it and the experience of doing it, is 90% of the value. And it doesn't matter how much you try to boil down the learnings from that. People can look at those artifacts and know some things, but the people actually doing the creation of those artifacts, doing the process, gaining the shared experience that led to those artifacts are getting way more richness. And that's evident in the way Curtis talked about.
I'd also add to what Randall's saying, the artifacts that come out of that, that's what needs to be diverse, right? One group may see it one way and implement it a specific way, and another may implement it a different way. And that offers up, right, multiple options and choices, executions. So I do see a lot of value coming out of this. And then what's the next is producing specific artifacts, but it's opening it up for interpretation, basically.
Yeah, with this focus here was to do the research analysis, and we didn't really look of how do you contribute that, because we were doing the background knowledge for the PBL. But that kind of leads into the next steps. And I think the next step, what could be is like I don't know, like teaching other people to run the same sessions. Would that be the solution? or like one solution, I guess. But because how else you will derive value from that? But at the beginning, when we started, we assumed that we could, like when people get the artifact and see it, they could improve it, and by improving it, they are learning. But it's usually never the case. And we didn't really think that far ahead when we created the proposal. Hey, we would need funds to actually pay somebody to do that again, basically. Or not again, but to improve it.
I think there'd be something to be said for sort of taking these sessions or letting people adopt these sessions and do them in different ways to suit themselves. But I also think building on what we've worked on, what we've discovered, like for instance, this whole question of your tools ending up shaping your culture, maybe there's some work to be done on how you take control of your tools and use them rather than letting them use you. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in the various ecosystems that we're all part of about how people have done that. And it could be a kind of spin-off and development from the insights that we've got from this part of the process. But it's interesting that the proposal originally was called Open dApp Framework, and it was aiming to build an open source framework for a perfect project management dApp. And I think what we've learned is that there isn't one, and that's not what is going to ever be produced.
Back to what Felix and Tiva was saying. So like Felix said, with the context orientation and understanding the nature of the problem being addressed, or the nature of the decision that needs to happen. And then like Tivo said, well, we want to improve, we want to iterate, we want to get better on this thing. What I've seen is if the contributors, the people who are voicing their opinion and trying to make that improvement, don't actually understand the context, then we're asking for trouble to a degree. So I like that there's the start of the conversation could be this structure where you're understanding what is even being addressed, why, and what's the purpose. And then you have all right, what is the artifact? What is the tool? What is the end goal, and how do we get there? That's maybe a separate conversation potentially.
Yeah, one thing from another learning is we actually didn't know what the artifact is going to be, but that kind of was coming up after the session, after analyzing, and then okay, this is the output. So it was never like, oh, we're gonna have this output. We always had like, oh, we're gonna have this discussion, but what's going to be the output? We never knew. And now when we know that, it's always like this, like an ebb and flow of like, do we continue and add more value on different topics? Or we are now going to take that artifact and figure out how to share it. And I think this could be the next step. Like making it more accessible from, and yeah, learning material. Like I think this is where I would like to go from there to have like help people to step through the learning that we got from the meetings and from the output.
Was there some specific output that dealt with the question of like if there was a more perfect project management tool or something that was better than what's already available, it would have these functional characteristics or work in some particular ways?
I mean, the first session was very much a comparative session, I believe, Randall. So,
right,
which is
surveying
useful.
what's existing.
Yeah, that's all. I would recommend that's a good place to start. So, but then you subsequent sessions found out, that not, well, it's kind of obvious in a way that not one tool is never the answer to everything. Yeah. So
that's not really what I was driving at. What I was driving at is what characteristics of a tool that addresses problems that the current tools don't address. Not to say there's going to be any perfect tools, but like what would a better tool that would be like head and shoulders above existing tools
I mean,
behave like?
I could chip in a little bit on that in a lot of the sessions, what we found was that people were saying that it was often about adaptability, because a truly adaptable tool, we identified this difference between tools and platforms. A platform is something you can customize completely, but there's usually a steep learning curve and it's expensive. So for a lot of groups, it's more about using an off-the-peg tool in an off-label way. And it's kind of, how can you do that? And how can you, is it adaptable? And with a bit of imagination, can you use it, even though it's cheap and even though it's not meant to be customizable? Can you? That was one of the things that came out as a kind of need, I think.
Yeah, it's not, we never actually created a functionality list, but we did play around with it. But our learnings are, we need to improve the questioning, what we propose to participants. But that is one attempt of what tools are you using for project management, and then like list it, is it open source, is it not? And then another one was, what does the tool do for you? So, but we were able to pick like few items like Twork, Maraboard, Google Suite, Gitbook, Actual Paper, and ClickUp. And this kinda is what I think you're asking, but it wasn't really like in depth. So it was like a good start to do that, functional thinking of what the decentralized project management tool would need. But we didn't go too comprehensive, because the next agenda items or based on feedback, we went through like differentiating between products and platforms, and then the culture came in there. So yeah, and then there isn't functional plan for that.
So not really. Okay. But it sounds like there might be information in that artifact that you're showing right now about, the survey of the different things, where there might be some specific baseline requirements, some specific areas of nice to have, depending on the target organization audience.
Yep. Yes.
Even also reminded me that I think it was the project management tools meeting session 2. We actually did work on a Miro board where we kind of broke a lot of that. I think it's to the frame that you're asking the question, and like, what are some of the major differences? We talked about having API integration or a learning curve of the tool, Are you trying to manage tasks or projects? And are you integrating goals? It was kind of a lot of what are the different features and functionalities between these tools. I feel like it was a decent artifact in the Miro board. I just don't think it's this exact Miro board.
Well, this is a summary. This was the actual session, but I aggregated the learnings into this one down here. One thing that also, yeah, well, another thing to look at is like the idea here was to, because it's a PBL, so my assumption that it is going to be iterative. So when we created the first lesson specifically, we were thinking that we are going to do them again, but better. So that would in the end kind of spiral down to that functionality and get it down, because yeah, I think there is a need for kind of having the list of all functionalities that would be needed. But yeah, if you haven't looked at the Open dApp Framework learning materials so far, I mean, give it a spin and see. All these videos that are not like that long, like there's the overview videos, 50 to 20 minutes in double speed, and you might actually find something that is, ooh. Anything else for next steps, like how could we improve other than moving on with the PBL course, making it the artifacts more accessible? Any experiments we should try? Because from my side, I clearly know that I'm going to move this document into the Andamio platform, and just probably going to change a little bit how it looks there, because it's going to include the context that Curtis said it's missing, like the onboarding before we go to the background knowledge. And yeah, for Wanda mentioned, like list of functionalities. Would that be a good next step for specialities? Or what else could we double down on thinking around these features when we are like, how do we run decentralized project management?
I do agree with Vanessa's point that the details, the tools and platforms and all those really come after orientation, come after the big why questions, right? Understanding why are we even here? Now, I think some people, though, however, some people maybe don't care about that, and they're just here for the tool, and they don't necessarily want to participate in that discovery, that onboarding. They just want to know what are the features. So that's just, I'm mindful that there's two different types of audience there.
I absolutely agree, but I think honestly, they are the people I want to hear from the most about kind of how their tool shapes how they're working. And if we can find a way to frame that so that they feel like it's a question they are keen to answer, I think that would be super interesting. Because the kind of people that are sort of here and have been at the sessions we've had have been quite analytical. But to hear from the people who just want to use a tool, how that tool shapes the way they work would be really interesting.
But is the framework actually a tool? I'm really not sure on this. I would really look on it more like a research, actually. On the gut, okay, it's more intellectual item than a tool, because I can't come and download it and say, oh, okay, cool, I download it and now I use it. Like, it's not really a tool, I think. I think one cool step would be actually to what was mentioned in the beginning of the session as well, to see where does the framework actually really works well, like where frameworks works and where frameworks breaks. And to just see, okay, cool, where does it actually make sense? Where's its strength and where's its limit?
Yeah, well, actually, I will share a bit, like, this is a downloadable tool, and the sessions 1 demos and 2 demonstrated how to use them. So this task management, documentation, and communication. Here are some titles. Okay, what these are about?
But,
coordination
so
management.
Then send me one link to download the tool.
Well, no, okay, good point. You need to copy paste it. Okay, that's. I'm just write it down that I make it a PDF file, so it's we can check.
But even then, it's a document. It's an intellectual subject. It's not a tool. Let's say I go to any app store, I say download, and bam, now I can use it. Right?
That's another learning we had on session 2, that methods are also tools. Like agile method is a tool.
Yeah, I think Felix.
But
I mean,
yes,
I hear what you're saying. It's a very literal sense of a tool, like a piece of software or a functional thing that's been programmed. But yeah, there's also approaches like facilitation approaches and other methods of, like the agile method, all this kind of thing, which are tools in themselves. They make things, and arguably, actually, they're the things that make things happen. And the tools, the software tools are kind of like, adjuncts to that. They're just something you can draw down. You could even take that further and say the actual tool is the culture, okay? Or you start with the culture and then you have a method to extract, to facilitate and enable what that culture does. And the tools are kind of maybe downstream from that.
But then in this regard, the framework is a tool set, not per se one specific tool, because it gathers several tools around specific use cases then, right? Without being forcefully one tool in this regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you might get cases where you use a specific tool for a specific purpose, like, for example, if you're testing some software, you need some software tools or something that this does one job, if you like. But that will be part of a broader ecosystem where you're using many tools, and that will include not just literal tools in terms of software tools, but also methods. So you're right, it will be lots of different things going together.
Are we not at cross purposes about what we're talking about when we say the framework? Yes, the proposal was called Open dApp Framework, but that didn't refer to the framework that, for instance, TiVo developed with the translators. The idea was that we were trying to find out whether there was a kind of bare framework that you could use that would produce the right kind of project management tool. And we've discovered that no, there isn't. But what are you meaning when you say the framework, Felix? Because I think there's a kind of talking at cross purposes going on.
Wouldn't say that cross purposes. I think our just language was a little different from the understanding of artifact, where we in session realized that tools can be methods, and I think Seben quite clearly.
No, I was just asking Felix what he meant when he said the framework, because I'm just not sure which framework. Has he gone? Oh, he's here.
No, I'm here. Well, I started my journey as a youngster as craftsman. Blacksmith of art was my very first thing, what I did when I was 16, 17 years old. I have a very clear understanding on what is a tool, what is a tool set, what is a methodology, which means how you use the tools, for example, in this regard. And then over the years, learning as well, okay, a bunch of other stuff, and I moved away from the craftsman side. I would say Miro is a tool, Zoom is a tool, a specific blockchain wallet is a tool, a smart contract is a tool. And here, for me, it's just much more, okay, this framework here outlines specific set of tools which can be used, but it's not a tool. Like, you don't call your tool set a tool.
That's what I mean. Which framework? When you say this framework here, which framework?
And this was what he will present you, actually.
Ah, right. Okay. I see. Because I'm not sure there is a framework. Do you know what I mean? I think that's exactly what we thought we would come up with and didn't come up with, is a framework to make the perfect project management tool. And I think, I don't know, it just feels like there is something more to, it's gone off on a tangent away from that.
I think it is a framework in this regard because he used it for the translators workgroup,
No,
right?
that's exactly what I was saying, is that that's not the main output from this project. That was like a spin-off, and it was something that Thibaut had already done, and we brought it in and analysed it and sort of tried to say, you know, what do we see in it, how's it worked and all that. But that was not the core of this project. And when we say open dApp framework, that wasn't it. So
well, it actually kind of was, because the core was to analyze dwork when and it started from actually session, I don't know, 0, I guess we can call it, before we even had the closing report. This is the first session. The framework looked a slightly different back then, but it was quite similar. And based on the first analysis, we came up with this framework. And then over time it got funded and all such thing, and then updated the framework.
yeah, I don't know, because I really think that's not quite what we ended up with. And the framework you developed with the translators was presented as an example, but we definitely looked at other approaches.
Oh yeah, we did look other things too, to improve, to see how can we make it. So we went a little bit more general, I would say. Curtis.
I actually really like the thought of the framework itself being the set of questions and critical thought processes that we navigated to discover what the canvas, the environment looks like, right? And then you have the use case of that framework is showing, all right, it's dwork, this is what we did, and here's the tools and methods that we are using in this particular use case. But is it, I mean, I feel as if we did produce a framework, if you define it as a series of steps and critical thoughts and questions that we ask ourselves to answer the why, and then the how can be interpreted in a numerous, infinite number of ways, right? Is that an accurate statement?
For me, yes.
It's probably quite fun that people have different takeaways. But I kind of see it as quite simple, really. I mean, if you think of it in terms of 3 sessions, where the first session was an introductory research, which actually was initially based off one tool, because that's how the proposal was initially framed, because everyone was using dwork, and that was kind of seen as the kind of de facto project management tool. But the first session was really comparing different project management tools that people had, and sort of working and sort of like, you know, kind of a bit like a SWOT analysis of that. The second session was looking at project management tools more generally, and how use cases vary, okay, and how those tools affect how people work, and how different people's cultures have different people's tools, that kind of thing. Out of that came some crossover with the translation team. And then the final workshop was about products, platforms, and culture. You know, so it was all about maybe slightly more in depth. It was just looking at, you know, how invested do you need to be in a product or a platform, you know, and what kind of resources you need to do to customize solutions for yourself. Like, you often find that, you know, people invest a lot into a customized solution, which has its benefits, but also has its downsides, and all people use off-the-shelf products, kind of like in a kind of bricolage way to, you know, make do and mend kind of thing to get things done. And then finally, we did draw some broad takeaways on community collaboration, which was like, I think you referred to them as like minimum requirements. Like, people need project management, people need treasury management, you need knowledge management, and you need some kind of governance. So that's what I took away from it, but not so much the framework, which I just see as the title of the proposal.
Yeah, I would agree that the name of the proposal is a bit misleading to the work that we're doing, because we are not analyzing decentralized application. Well, dwork is a little bit, but we thought that we're gonna find more of them, and we're gonna create like a bit more details of how would you build that, or what would you need to build that. But then again, yeah, well, it's from the materials we created, it would be hard to derive that information. But it's technically is including, like if you go through this whole stuff, you can transform it into functional requirements. Because like how do we engage, like this question, like in the last session, how do you engage with existing communities? And there are things that people say that, oh, if that would be a function, like if it is a problem or a practice or a routine or something that is done in community, that could be automated. And that's, but yeah, it wasn't something that we did for these sessions.
What was your key learning on the whole thing, Tivo?
Like I would say, to me, it was like structured discussion, were like the most impactful sessions I've had, because it was like abstract topics and like having this like downtime. Okay, everybody 5 minutes now, write down whatever. It created such like a wide spectrum that I wasn't able to like even assume. For example, like what kind of caught me off guard is when we had this, like what tools you're using, and somebody mentioned I'm using pen and pencil, like paper and pencil. Like, no way, that's brilliant. and then like yeah, having that kind of like a broad view of each person, because I'm like I use systematic tools and like structural stuff, and this kind of, yeah, like learning about these different things gave me insights. And because I was analyzing all of that and tried to fit it into the framework, then I kind of also learned that, okay, this framework doesn't fit for that. I need to create a tool set, like you mentioned, so that it has multiple of frameworks based on the people's needs. But it kind of got, okay, this is overwhelming. I don't have time to create framework for every single session. So yeah, that was another learning. But in general, I really enjoyed these kinds of like going through a series of things that take time, like because you couldn't go through entire framework in one session unless its session is like 5 hours. But that kind of kills people's vibe, I guess.
But that's interesting. So in this regard, it's actually not forcefully the outcome, but the process of building the framework, which has the largest value to do in this regard.
No, the outcome is also quite heavily, because again, discussions and some material, I'm using them, but that's the thing. What I said, like, how do I now transform it so others could also understand how to use that? Because I have the context of, oh, it worked in this situation, so I could use that again. But how do I describe, how do I make that critical difference to others? Like, what is the similar situation? And then you have that brain link, oh, I go to this document, find this section and take these questions.
I think, I mean, all the discussions about whether it's a framework or not, in a sense, it was a useful exercise, as you say, Thibaut, and it was quite nice how each workshop contrasted with each one. And also what was great was the participants is that, and this is another lesson I think learned, is that the contrast of participants, having very different participants in some of the sessions really helped contrast people's approaches and people's ideas in a very productive way. And also it kind of communicated the fact that, there are different needs and different cultures, and different ways of working. And it's really interesting to see people contributing to a workshop and coming up with different ways that they work, everything from pen and paper to Google Sheet to a coded, a customized tool, And it was interesting to see the range of that. So, I would say that is a useful process. That is worth continuing on in other sessions in the future.
Regarding running a project, previously it was like, oh, Swarm is now using dwork and they're sharing it everybody. And then people started asking me questions like, how do you do this and that? And I even promoted dwork before I even used it myself. Most of the stuff, everything was Felix was doing in the background. So that was a huge learning for me to actually use the dwork. But thanks for everybody for watching who's looking at that from the YouTube. Thanks for watching and see you in different communities.